Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old single mother, drives through torrential rain on a winding mountain road. Her 7-year-old daughter Emma sleeps in the back seat, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. Their car is packed with whatever belongings they could grab in a hurry. Sarah's hands tremble on the steering wheel, her eyes constantly checking the rear-view mirror. She's running from her abusive ex-husband Marcus, who was released from prison 3 days ago and has already found them twice. The gas light blinks. Sarah's phone shows no signal. The rain intensifies, making visibility nearly impossible. Suddenly, a deer leaps onto the road. Sarah swerves, the car skids, and they crash into a muddy embankment. The airbags deploy. Emma wakes up screaming. Sarah quickly checks her daughter for injuries. They're both shaken but unharmed. The car won't start. Sarah grabs their emergency bag and helps Emma out into the rain. Through the darkness and fog, she spots a faint light in the distance. With no other choice, she carries Emma toward it. They stumble through the forest for what feels like hours. Emma is crying, cold and terrified. Just when Sarah thinks they can't go any further, they emerge into a clearing. Before them stand a village that seems frozen in time. Wooden cottages with thatched roofs, cobblestone paths, oil lamps glowing in windows. No power lines, no modern vehicles, nothing that suggests the 21st century. A figure emerges from the nearest cottage. An elderly woman named Margaret, wrapped in a shawl, approaches them with concern. Her accent is strange, almost archaic. She asks no questions about why they're here or where they came from. She simply takes them inside, wraps them in blankets, and prepares hot soup. Sarah is too exhausted and grateful to question this odd hospitality. Margaret explains that this is Hollow's End, a community that chose to reject modern society decades ago. They live simply, sustainably, away from the corruption of the outside world. Sarah, desperate for safety and anonymity, sees this as a blessing. Here, Marcus will never find them. The next morning, Sarah wakes to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Emma is already awake, playing with wooden toys Margaret has provided. For the first time in months, Sarah feels a small measure of peace. Margaret introduces them to the village elder, a stern man named Thomas Blackwood, who wears dark clothing and carries himself with unsettling authority. Thomas studies Sarah with penetrating gray eyes. He asks about her situation, and Sarah, trying to be vague, explains she's escaping a dangerous situation and needs somewhere to hide temporarily. Thomas nods slowly and makes an offer that seems too good to be true. They can stay in Hollow's End. There's an empty cottage on the village's edge. In exchange, Sarah will contribute to the community however she can. Sarah accepts immediately. Thomas warns her that Hollow's End has rules. Everyone contributes. Everyone participates in community gatherings. No one leaves without permission. And most importantly, no one speaks of the village to outsiders. Sarah agrees to everything, believing these are simply the conditions of an isolated, self-sustaining community. They move into the cottage, a charming 2-room structure with a wood-burning stove and simple furniture. Emma seems happier than she's been in years, playing outside with village children who appear fascinated by her. Sarah begins working in the community garden, learning skills she never thought she'd need. For 2 weeks, life seems almost perfect. But Sarah begins noticing strange things. The villagers never use names for the days of the week. They mark time differently, by moon phases and seasonal markers. No one has family photos, books from the outside world, or mentions any life before Hollow's End. When Sarah asks about their histories, people change the subject or walk away. The village holds frequent gatherings in a large barn at the center of town. Everyone attends. They sing hymns Sarah doesn't recognize, led by Thomas, who speaks about sacrifice, devotion, and the price of safety. The words are unsettling, almost cult-like, but Sarah tells herself it's just their way of maintaining community bonds. Emma makes a friend, a quiet girl named Lily who is around her age. But Lily never talks about her parents. When Emma asks, Lily says simply that the village is her family. Sarah notices that many of the children seem to belong to no one specifically. They move between households, cared for collectively but never claimed. One evening, Sarah hears screaming from the forest. She rushes outside, but the villagers seem unconcerned. Margaret tells her it's just animals. Mountain lions hunt at night. But the scream sounded human, desperate. Sarah lies awake all night, listening. The next morning, she notices a new grave in a small cemetery at the village's edge. Fresh dirt, a simple wooden cross with no name. When she asks Margaret about it, the old woman's face goes cold. She says a traveler passed through weeks ago, fell ill and died. They buried him according to their customs. But Sarah saw no sick traveler, and that grave wasn't there yesterday. Sarah's unease grows. She tries to leave one day, planning to walk back to where their car crashed and get help. But when she reaches a village boundary, 3 men are standing there, blocking the path. They smile politely and explain that Thomas hasn't approved her departure. They escort her back, their grip on her arms firm despite their pleasant words. That night, Sarah packs her things and decides they'll sneak out after midnight. But when she tries to open the cottage door, it's locked from the outside. She pounds on it, shouting, "No one comes." Emma is terrified, asking what's happening. Sarah lies and says it's a mistake. In the morning, Thomas himself unlocks the door. He enters their cottage with Margaret and 2 other village leaders. His expression is disappointed, almost paternal. He says Sarah has broken trust by trying to leave. In Hollow's End, commitment is everything. Those who stay must truly stay. He asks if she understands. Sarah, seeing no choice, nods and apologizes. Thomas smiles. He says there's a ceremony tonight. Sarah and Emma will participate. It's time they became true members of the community. This is presented as an honor, but Sarah's blood runs cold. She asks what the ceremony involves. Thomas only says it's ancient tradition, the foundation of Hollow's End survival. Everyone who stays must participate. There are no exceptions. Sarah spends a day in mounting terror, trying to appear compliant while desperately searching for a way out. The villagers prepare for the ceremony with unsettling enthusiasm. They gather candles, prepare food, and hang strange symbols around the barn. The symbols are ancient, predating any religion Sarah recognizes. They look almost pagan, carved into wooden plaques that seem centuries old. A young woman named Ruth approaches Sarah. Ruth is perhaps 25, with haunted eyes that suggest she hasn't always lived here. She speaks quietly, glancing around to ensure no one hears. She tells Sarah to pay attention during the ceremony, to watch everything, and to understand that escape is possible, but only if Sarah is smart and patient. Before Sarah can ask more, Ruth walks away. That small interaction gives Sarah a sliver of hope. She's not the only one who wants out. As evening falls, the entire village gathers in the barn. Candles create dancing shadows on the walls. Thomas stands at the center, wearing robes Sarah hasn't seen before, deep red and embroidered with those same ancient symbols. The villagers form a circle, and Sarah and Emma are brought to the center. Thomas begins speaking in a language Sarah doesn't understand. It sounds old, guttural, nothing like the archaic English she normally uses. The villagers respond in unison, chanting. The atmosphere becomes oppressive, the air thick and hard to breathe. Emma clutches Sarah's hand, whimpering. Then Thomas switches to English. He speaks of the covenant. Centuries ago, he says, the founders of Hollow's End made a pact. They sought refuge from a world that wanted to destroy them, persecuted for their beliefs. They fled to these mountains and called upon ancient powers for protection. Those powers answered. In exchange for absolute secrecy and periodic sacrifice, the village would remain hidden, protected from all outside threats, existing in a pocket of time where they would never age, never sicken, never be found. Sarah's mind reels. This is insanity. But as she looks around, she realizes something horrifying. Margaret, who claimed to be elderly, has skin that's too smooth, eyes too bright. Thomas, who she assumed was in his 50s, could be much, much older. The villagers don't age. They can't age. They've been here for decades, perhaps centuries, sustained by whatever dark force they've bound themselves to. Thomas explains that the covenant requires renewal. Every few years, new blood must join the community. New members must be bound through the ceremony. Those who refuse or try to leave become the sacrifice. Their life force feeds the covenant, maintaining the protection. Sarah realizes with horror why there are fresh graves, why she heard screaming, why the villagers showed no concern. Those graves contain people like her, people who sought refuge and found a prison, people who tried to escape and became offerings. Thomas approaches Sarah and Emma with a ceremonial knife. He says they will each make a small cut, letting their blood fall into an ancient stone bowl at the center of the circle. Once their blood mingles with the covenant, they'll be bound to Hollow's end forever. They'll stop aging. They'll be protected. But they'll never leave. Sarah pulls Emma behind her and refuses. She screams at Thomas, calls him insane, threatens a fight. The villagers close in, their expression sympathetic but implacable. This is how it works. This is how it's always worked. Everyone resists at first. Then they understand. Then they accept. Or they die. Margaret steps forward, her voice soft. She says she was once like Sarah. She came here fleeing violence in 1847, over 170 years ago. She was terrified. She resisted, but she survived. She accepted the covenant, and she's been safe ever since. Time passes differently here. The outside world can't touch them. Isn't that what Sarah wanted? Safety? Sarah realizes she's trapped. If she refuses, they'll kill her and Emma. If she accepts, they'll be prisoners forever, ageless and hidden, cut off from everything. There's no good choice. In desperation, she agrees to the ceremony but begs to wait one day. She needs to prepare Emma, to help her daughter understand. Thomas considers this and agrees. One day, tomorrow night, they'll complete the ritual. Sarah and Emma are escorted back to their cottage. The door is locked again from outside. Through the window, Sarah sees villagers taking turns standing guard. But she notices the guard changes every few hours, and during those brief transitions, there's a moment when no one watches. Ruth appears outside the window after midnight. She whispers urgently, "There is a way out, but it's dangerous." The covenant's power is tied to the barn and the symbols within it. If those symbols are destroyed, the covenant breaks. The village will lose its protection. The villagers will begin aging again. They'll become visible to the outside world. But there's a cost. Breaking the covenant will release everything it's been holding back. All the time that's been suspended will crash down at once. The villagers will age decades or centuries in moments. Most will die immediately. Ruth says she's been planning this for years, but couldn't do it alone. She came here in 1963, fleeing a violent marriage like Sarah. She's been trapped for over 60 years, looking barely 25, while her children and grandchildren in the outside world have grown old and died without her. She wants to end this. She wants justice for everyone the village has killed. She wants to free the others who might still want out, even if it costs her own life. Sarah is horrified by the plan. Destroying the covenant means killing everyone here, including children like Lily who've never known anything else. But Ruth says those children deserve a chance at a real life, even if it's shorter. And every day the covenant continues, more innocent people die. The cycle must end. Sarah grapples with this impossible choice. Condemn the villagers to death or condemn herself and Emma to eternal imprisonment. Ruth tells her she has until tomorrow night. During the ceremony, when everyone is gathered and distracted, Ruth will create a diversion. That's when Sarah must act. The next day passes in agonizing slowness. Sarah tries to act normal, while her mind races. She watches the villagers, seeing them differently now. They're not evil, not really. They're survivors who made a terrible choice and have been trapped by it ever since. But they're also killers. They've murdered countless people to maintain their unnatural existence. Emma senses something is wrong. Sarah holds her daughter close and tells her they're going to play a game tonight. When Mommy says run, Emma must run as fast as she can into the forest and not look back. Emma, frightened but trusting, agrees. Evening comes. The ceremony begins again. This time, the atmosphere is even more intense. Thomas seems eager to finish what was interrupted. Sarah and Emma are brought to the center. The chanting begins. The ancient language fills the barn. Sarah's heart pounds so hard she thinks it might explode. Then Ruth makes her move. She suddenly collapses, convulsing on the floor. It looks like a seizure. The villagers rush to help her, the circle breaking. In the confusion, Sarah grabs Emma and runs. But not out of the barn, toward the symbols. She reaches the first wooden plaque and tears it from the wall. The moment it falls, the temperature drops dramatically. Frost appears on the windows. The candles flicker. Thomas realizes what's happening and screams at the villagers to stop her. Sarah runs along the wall, ripping down symbol after symbol. The villagers chase her, but something is already happening. The air crackles with energy. The barn shakes. Thomas tries to stop Sarah himself, but Ruth, no longer convulsing, tackles him. Sarah tears down the last symbol. For a moment, everything stops. Complete silence. Then the barn explodes with invisible force. The doors blowing open, windows shattering. A sound like 1,000 voices crying out at once fills the air. The aging begins. Margaret's smooth skin wrinkles and spots in seconds. Her back curves. Her hair whitens and falls out in clumps. She collapses, gasping, her body crumbling to dust before Sarah's eyes. All around the barn, the same thing happens. Centuries of suspended time crash down on the villagers simultaneously. Thomas, his face rapidly aging, crawls toward Sarah with hatred burning in his yellowing eyes. He screams that she's killed them all. Sarah backs away, pulling Emma close, shielding her daughter's eyes from the horror unfolding. Some villagers age into extreme old age but survive. They collapse, ancient and feeble, but breathing. Others, like Margaret, who'd been here since the 1800s, simply turn to dust. The children, surprisingly, change less. They age slightly, becoming teenagers or young adults, but they survive. They were young enough that the time wasn't as extreme. Ruth ages from looking 25 to her true age, now in her mid-80s. But she's alive, smiling through tears. She's mortal again, free. She'll die soon, but as herself, not as a prisoner. The barn is full of dust, decay, and the elderly. Thomas, now appearing around 200 years old, withered but clinging to life, gasps out a final curse. He says Sarah's doomed them all. The covenant didn't just protect them from aging. It protected them from something else. Something in the mountains. Something they'd awaken when they made their pact. Something that's been kept at bay all these centuries. And now it's free. Thomas dies. Sarah doesn't understand what he meant, but she doesn't wait to find out. She takes Emma's hand, and they run into the night. Sarah and Emma flee through the forest. Behind them, they hear sounds, not from the villagers, but from the forest itself. Movement in the trees, branches breaking. A deep, guttural breathing that echoes from everywhere and nowhere. Sarah realizes Thomas was telling the truth. The covenant protected the village from something, and now that protection is gone. She runs faster, Emma struggling to keep up. They stumble in the darkness, guided only by moonlight. They reach the location where their car crashed, but the vehicle is gone. The road is barely visible, overgrown as if it hasn't been used in years. Sarah's sense of time distorts. How long were they really in Hollow's End? Days? Weeks? The forest seems different, wilder. The breathing sound grows closer. Sarah sees movement in her peripheral vision. Shadows that move wrong, too fluid, too fast. She picks up Emma and runs blindly, praying for some sign of civilization. They burst out of the forest onto a paved road. Modern streetlights glow in the distance. The sight is so shocking after the timeless existence of Hollow's End that Sarah almost cries. They're back in the real world. A car approaches. Sarah waves desperately. The car stops. A young couple inside looks concerned. They ask if Sarah and Emma are okay, if they need help. Sarah almost sobs with relief. Yes, they need help. They need police, shelter, everything. The couple drives them to the nearest town, 30 miles away. During the drive, Sarah checks the date on the car's dashboard. Only 4 days have passed since the crash. It felt like weeks in the village. The couple notices Sarah's confusion and asks where she's been. Sarah doesn't know how to explain. At the police station, Sarah tries to report what happened, but her story sounds insane. A village that doesn't age, a covenant with dark powers, villagers who turn to dust. The officers exchange glances. They're sympathetic, but clearly think she's had some kind of breakdown. They ask if she's been using drugs or she's hurt her head in the crash. Sarah realizes no one will believe her, and perhaps that's for the best. Hollow's End wanted to remain hidden, and in a way, it still is. Without proof, without bodies, it's just an impossible story. The police do find evidence of the car crash and arrange for it to be towed. They offer Sarah and Emma a ride to a women's shelter, a safe place where Marcus won't find them. Sarah accepts. At the shelter, Sarah and Emma are given a room, food, and support. Counselors help Sarah file for a protective order. She contacts a lawyer about custody. Slowly, carefully, she begins rebuilding their lives. Emma, traumatized but resilient, starts seeing a child therapist who helps her process what happened. Weeks pass. Sarah often thinks about Hollow's End. Did it really happen? Sometimes it feels like a fever dream. But then she looks at Emma and sees the same haunted recognition in her daughter's eyes. It was real. One night, Sarah receives a letter. No return address. Inside is a single page, written in shaky handwriting. It's from Ruth. The letter explains that several of the villagers survived. The children, now aged into their teens and 20s, escaped into the world. Ruth herself lived only a few days after Covenant broke, but she died free, and that was enough. She thanks Sarah for giving her that gift. The letter ends with a warning. Ruth never learned what Thomas meant about the thing in the mountains, but in her final days, she heard stories from the oldest survivors. Long ago, before the Covenant, something dwelled in those mountains, a presence, an entity. The founders of Hollow's End stumbled upon it, awakened it somehow. The Covenant wasn't just made for protection from the outside world. It was made to keep that entity bound, contained by their collective life force and ritual. Now it's loose. Ruth doesn't know what it is or what it wants. But it's no longer confined to the mountains. It's spreading, searching. And the only people who knew how to stop it are dead. Sarah burns the letter, try and forget, but she can't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, late at night, she hears that breathing sound outside her window. She sees shadows that move wrong. Emma wakes up screaming about something in her closet, something with too many eyes. Sarah tells herself it's trauma, post-traumatic stress. They're safe now. Hollow's End is gone. Whatever was there can't reach them. But deep down, she knows that's not true. One evening, 3 months after escaping, Sarah returns to the shelter with Emma after a visit to the therapist. As they walk down the hallway to their room, Sarah notices something. Symbols, scratched faintly into the wallpaper near their door. The same symbols that were in the barn. Sarah's blood turns to ice. She grabs Emma and backs away. Someone has been here. Someone from the village. But who? The survivors? Or something else? She reports it to the shelter staff, who see nothing. They think Sarah is imagining things, her paranoia getting worse. They increase her therapy sessions. Sarah doesn't argue. She's starting to doubt herself. That night, Sarah wakes to find Emma standing at the window, staring out into the darkness. Sarah approaches slowly and asks what she's looking at. Emma points. Outside, barely visible in the streetlight, stands a figure, tall, impossibly thin, with a shape that seems to shift and waver. It watches their window. Sarah pulls Emma away and calls the police. By the time officers arrive, the figure is gone. They find no evidence anyone was there. The officers are kind but concerned. They suggest Sarah might benefit from psychiatric evaluation. Sarah realizes she's on her own. If something is hunting them, no one will believe her until it's too late. She needs to understand what the Covenant actually bound. She needs to know how to stop it. She begins researching. Local libraries, online archives, anything about the mountains where Hollow's End existed. She finds scattered references. Native American tribes avoided those mountains, calling them cursed. Early settlers reported strange disappearances. In 1723, an entire logging camp vanished overnight. Only one survivor was found, driven mad, speaking about something that wore the shapes of men but wasn't human. Sarah finds a reference to a historian who specializes in regional folklore. She contacts him and he agrees to meet. The historian, an elderly man named Dr. Morrison, listens to her story with surprising seriousness. He says he's heard pieces of it before, from other survivors of encounters in those mountains over the decades. Dr. Morrison explains that the entity was never properly named, but indigenous legends call it the Hollow One. It exists in liminal spaces, places between civilization and wilderness. It feeds on isolation, fear, and the life force of those trapped between worlds. The founders of Hollow's End, fleeing persecution, inadvertently created the perfect feeding ground. They were already isolated, already afraid, already disconnected from society. The Covenant turned them into a battery, sustaining the entity while also keeping it localized. With the Covenant broken, the entity is unbound and starving. It will seek out those who broke its food source. It will seek Sarah. Dr. Morrison says there might be a way to stop it. The indigenous tribes had rituals of banishment, ways to force such entities back into dormancy. But they require knowledge Sarah doesn't have, and resources she can't access. He offers a help, but warns it will be dangerous. The entity grows stronger the more it feeds. Every day they wait, it becomes harder to stop. Sarah faces an impossible decision. Risk her and Emma's life, try to fight an entity she barely understands, or run forever, always looking over her shoulder, knowing that eventually it will find them. She chooses to fight. Dr. Morrison gathers materials and information. He explains they must return to the mountains, to the site of Hollow's End. The entity is strongest there, but that's also where it can be rebound. They must perform a counter-ritual, not a covenant, but a banishment, forcing the entity back into dormancy and sealing it there. Sarah makes arrangements for Emma to stay with a trusted counselor from the shelter. Emma doesn't want to be separated, but Sarah insists. This is too dangerous. If something goes wrong, Emma needs to be safe. Sarah and Dr. Morrison drive into the mountains. As they approach the location where Hollow's End once stood, the atmosphere changes. The air feels thick. The forest is silent. No birds, no insects, nothing alive. They find the village, or what remains of it. The cottages are collapsed. The barn is a pile of ash. But the stones from the ceremonial circle remain, cracked and scorched. The graves are still there, dozens of unmarked wooden crosses. Dr. Morrison begins a ritual. He draws symbols in the dirt, burns specific herbs, and chants in a language Sarah doesn't recognize. The temperature drops. That familiar breathing sound returns. All around them, shadows move between the trees. The entity appears. It's not one thing, but many, a collection of shapes and limbs and faces that shift constantly. Human features appear and disappear in its form. The faces of everyone who died in Hollow's End. Everyone it consumed over centuries. It speaks with their voices, a chorus of the dead. It tells Sarah she was foolish to return. She freed it. She should be grateful it will consume her quickly. Dr. Morrison continues chanting, his voice growing stronger. The entity screams, a sound that makes Sarah's ears bleed. It lunges at Morrison, but his ritual creates a barrier. The entity can't reach him. Sarah realizes she has a role to play. Morrison shouts instructions. She must desecrate the stones, break the physical anchors the entity used. She grabs a fallen branch and begins smashing the stones. With each stone broken, the entity weakens. Its form becomes less stable. The voices of the dead grow louder, but they're not threatening anymore. They're pleading, trapped souls begging for release. Sarah breaks the final stone. The entity's form collapses inward, pulling into itself. Dr. Morrison completes the banishment, sealing the entity in the ground beneath Hollow's End, bound not by covenant, but by a prison of the earth itself. The forest goes silent. Then, slowly, natural sounds return. Birds chirp. Wind rustles leaves. Life flows back into the area. Dr. Morrison collapses. Exhausted, he tells Sarah it's done. The entity is bound, perhaps not forever, but for generations at least. Long enough that it will be someone else's problem. Sarah helps him to the car, and they leave the mountains. As they drive away, Sarah sees something in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the forest are figures. The surviving villagers who aged into elderly people. The children who became teenagers. They watch her leave, and Sarah can't tell if their expressions are grateful or resentful. She never sees them again. 6 months later, Sarah and Emma have moved to a new city. They've legally changed their names. Marcus was arrested for violating parole and is back in prison. Sarah has a job, a small apartment, and Emma is in school, making friends, slowly healing. Sometimes Sarah still has nightmares about Hollow's End. Sometimes Emma wakes up afraid, but the shadows don't move wrong anymore. The breathing sound is gone. They're safe. Dr. Morrison sends occasional letters. Checking in, he's documented everything and placed it in an archive, a warning for future generations. The mountains are now part of a protected wilderness area. No one can build there. No one can settle there. The entity sleeps beneath the earth, and so it will remain. Sarah receives one final letter, forwarded from the shelter. It's from Lily, the girl Emma befriended in the village. Lily is 15 now, living with foster parents, attending high school. She writes that she remembers everything. She's grateful to Sarah for freeing her from Hollow's End, even though it meant losing the only life she'd known. She's learning to live in the modern world. It's strange and scary, but it's real, and that makes it worth it. Sarah reads a letter to Emma. Her daughter smiles, genuinely happy for the first time in months. Emma asks if they can write back. Sarah says yes. As Sarah sits down to compose a response, she looks out the window at the city. Life moves around her, normal and mundane and beautiful. No ancient entities. No dark covenants. Just people living their messy, complicated, finite lives. And that's enough. Sarah begins writing. She tells Lily that she's proud of her, that adapting to a new world takes courage, that the hardest journeys often lead to the best destinations. She tells Lily that she and Emma are here if she ever needs anything, that they're family now, bound not by blood or magic, but by survival and choice. She seals a letter and places it in her bag to mail tomorrow. Emma is playing in her room, humming a song she learned at school. Sarah closes her eyes and breathes deeply, allowing herself to feel something she hasn't felt in a long time. Peace. The story ends not with dramatic revelation or final confrontation, but with quiet resolution. Sarah escaped her abusive ex-husband only to stumble into something far more dangerous. She discovered a village hiding a deadly secret and was forced to make an impossible choice. In breaking the covenant, she freed the trapped and defeated the monster. But more importantly, she saved herself and her daughter. The scars remain. The memories linger. But they survived. They're free. And in a world that tried to trap them at every turn, that freedom is the greatest victory of all.